certain that picture makes me look far scarier than I actually am. So I'll start with a quick introduction. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the cyber team in KPMG UK. Prior to that, I was the head of cybersecurity for the Ministry of Defence in the UK. And I've been involved in this field for 30 years now, I think, which just makes me feel old. But it also gives you a perspective on life as you look back as well. So what I'm going to talk to you, and there's only 3 slides, because I'm between you and lunch. I'm going to take you through some challenges. I'm going to take you through some responses by the community to those challenges. And then I'm going to bring it together into a view of the future, which you can challenge, debate as you wish. And feel free to grab me over lunch for any questions as well. So challenges. I'm interested in challenges. And I've broken them down really into 5 separate blocks. For me, the first one is around state activity in cyber. Espionage, offensive cyber operations. And I took a moment to read the latest intelligence assessment from the Director of National Intelligence in the US. Always an interesting document. Cyber always right at the very front in terms of emerging threats. But one of the things that was striking in there was the number of nations who have offensive cyber warfare capabilities. 8 years ago, that figure was 6. And I think you can guess who they were. That figure is now 34 nations. Every self-respecting military is building out offensive cyber capabilities as a way of projecting power and influence on the international stage, often unattributable and deniable. We've also seen something else. If you look back, you may remember a summit meeting between President Obama and President Xi Jinping of China. It's an unusual summit. It came at a time when we were dealing with large-scale cyber espionage, theft of intellectual property. And we could look around and we could tell which economic sectors were being targeted. High technologies, life sciences, security, defense, aviation, space. Following that summit and the agreement that was reached, we saw a marked reduction in cyber espionage for economic purposes. That accord is now quite fragile. There have been many recent indictments by the US of Chinese intelligence operatives, extradition attempts as well. So I have a concern we'll see a rise and an increase in the scale of economic espionage we see, and a return to levels that we might have seen 5 years ago. That's one of my concerns. I'm also very interested in fake news just now, a lot of it around. And I know it's a theme that I often hear in Finland as well. The ability to manipulate the information environment at scale. The botnets, the internet trolling, the fake news, the fake narratives. And all of this plays into a model where states are respecting less and less the boundaries in cyberspace. That's interesting. So if I read the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report, cybersecurity is right up there as #1 risk for advanced economies. But next to it is another risk. Territorialism, protectionism, the breakdown in some of that international global commerce, the common good environment we had seen in the past. That's interesting. That's a concern. So I think you'll see more and more countries trying to defend their information space, whether we call that cybersecurity or not. Amongst all of this, organized crime is actually doing quite well. Thank you. So we can debate at great length the scale of transnational organized cybercrime. There are many estimates. The one I've used is around $600 billion a year just now. That includes some valuation of intellectual property theft as part of the calculation. But the thing for me is this is now big transnational business. So when Interpol breaks down organized crime call centers, they will find every nationality in there. China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, Nigeria, Russia, operating very much as a transnational operation. And we talk a lot about artificial intelligence as helping us, the defenders. Please don't rule out how artificial intelligence can be used to help the attackers as well. The social media targeting, scraping, analysis, the ability to scale and industrialize, the CEO frauds, the whaling attacks we see already, still proving very successful, no more than cyber-enabled confidence tricks. We're also seeing some shifts. So organized crime has moved into the cryptocurrency market. They get attracted by the bubble as well, by the valuations, by the scale of potential profits. So we've seen over $2 billion of reported cybercrime over the last 24 months against cryptocurrency exchanges, online wallets, mining exchanges. And of course, we've also seen a shift, beginning to reverse now, between I haven't affected your system. I've got two choices. Do I use it for ransomware and extort some money in bitcoins from you? Or do I use that computing capacity to mine cryptocurrency? And 12 months ago, that tilted towards the cryptocurrency. We're now seeing it begin to tilt back. What does that tell you? It tells you that organized crime is a rational economic system and model. They're attracted to speculation as well, and a very sharp focus on the bottom line. And the last trend for me in the bottom right is we're seeing supply chains get a lot more interest and attention now. The reality is that many large global firms are actually getting better at cybersecurity. Detection, monitoring, endpoint security controls, perimeter controls as well. The harder targets than they used to be, which means moving your attack focus onto the supply chains, looking for those weak roots in the trusted relationships. And we're seeing those shifts happening now, quite effective. And this is one of the challenges for states, is how do you raise the bar for the whole community cybersecurity, not just the big global corporates who have the resources to establish security operations centers, threat hunting teams, all of that complex web of skills we need for cyber. So for me, responses. How do we as a community respond to this, and what are we seeing? So the first one for me is, unsurprisingly, we're seeing a lot more regulatory interest in critical national infrastructure than we ever saw. 2 years ago, wasn't on the radar. Now, with the Network and Information Security Directive, we're seeing regulators beginning to drive standards and requirements down onto critical infrastructure. We're also seeing regulators begin to worry about systemic risk in a way they didn't previously. So if I speak to the Bank of England in the UK, yes, it regulates the main financial banks, asset managers, and insurers. But that's not where the big worry is. The big worry is the dependencies that sit below that now. The cloud providers, yes, but also the fintechs just now, who provide key technology and systems embedded across our whole financial infrastructure. Most of the time, they're not regulated. They're not in the scope of the supervisory regime of the central banks. But they are a systemic risk. So the critical national infrastructure piece, for me, is on everybody's radar. And that means dealing with legacy systems, infrastructure, and capabilities, where some of those industrial control systems are 20 years old, sometimes more, need to be wrapped, segregated, monitored. That's a growth area. We're also seeing something else, which is finally the financial institutions breaking down some barriers internally between cybersecurity and fraud control. Because ultimately, cybercrime is about money, cash out, monetization, using the information you've gained, manipulating the system's accesses you have, getting to the point where you can turn that into hard cash, laundered through the international financial system. So we are now seeing a lot more collaboration between fraud control, anti-money laundering, know your customer, and cybersecurity threat intelligence that we'd ever seen. That's a positive thing. We're also seeing some odd collaborations between telecommunications and finance as well. Why? Very, very easy in the UK. We have problems called SIM swap frauds. What did it mean? You try and break into the bank account, but you need that second factor, that authentication message that gets sent to your mobile, saying, oh, you're setting up a new mandate, you're making a high-value transaction, type this code in. And of course, what the organized crime groups had done was they targeted the telecoms firms to say, my mobile phone's lost. Please transfer my number. That way I've compromised your PC, but I've also compromised your mobile phone. I have the two pieces I need to be back in the game again. So we're seeing more cross-sector collaboration in the UK now, and that's important. Privacy has run across Europe. Everybody now waits to see the fines, the initial cases, the enforcement action. And many of the firms I've dealt with were very, very busy in the run-up to the 25th of May. Then things got quieter, and everybody is waiting, in part, because they know that GDPR will drive a fundamental change in the way they have to handle personal data and metadata. And for many of those firms, that involves not just compliance, but the potential for a fundamental re-engineering of many of their core systems. And in the case of those data lakes they built, having to retrofit the privacy controls around those large aggregate lakes they were mining happily for commercial advantage. So everybody sees the challenge here around GDPR. But I think it has potential to change the way that personal data is handled. So a few other things for me. Security is changing. And it's crept up in a lot of organizations. We can talk about cloud. We can talk about DevSecOps. We can talk about Agile. Any of those. Oh, and digital channels. Oh, and open APIs just now. But the IT environment that many firms are moving towards is fundamentally different from the legacy systems, the compliance regimes they operated previously. That's a new security mindset. An outsourcing of technical security to Microsoft, Google, Amazon, other cloud providers are available. A need to integrate security into the whole development lifecycle with continuous monitoring and testing in a way that we just haven't done before as a community. A much more dynamic monitoring of how effective those security measures really are and how that feeds back. That feels different. And as I go into big international banks, it almost feels like security is now two different tribes. Over here, I have compliance, controls, assurance. Very traditional. Often the answer is to say no. Over here, I have digital security. Built in, part of the development teams, continuously monitored, look at the pattern of fraud, adapt the security controls. It feels a very different culture. And that's where the business is going and investing for the future. That feels very different. And we see something else beginning, which is a debate for the future. It's a variant of privacy. It's about digital trust. So how much should we educate customers and consumers on cybersecurity? How much should major corporates take on the responsibility of helping its customers secure their lives? And in doing so, will they be trusted with more personal data, more interactions? And for the banks, this is a fascinating debate now, because it sets out a very different style of relationship around digital lives. And I could have the same discussion with the insurers. Everybody wants that trust. Everybody wants the interactions, the personal information. But it's a very different model. So for me, if I pull this all together into a vision of the future, it feels a little bit different for me. Of course, there's cloud and DevSecOps, different culture, different way of integrating security, a different relationship between a chief information security officer and the outsourced service providers who manage and handle much of their data security. A process of continuous controls, monitoring, and testing. So not just annual penetration testing, but continual controls checking, validation, and automated workflows. It's already starting, difficult to engineer properly, a lot of legacy systems to deal with, but you can see the trend developing. Oh, and the regulators will love that, because of course you can then provide them with direct feeds on the status and compliance state as well. Active defense. This one fascinates me. It's the partnership between industry and the state to detect and disrupt organized crime infrastructure, to spot the fake websites and take them down within minutes rather than days, to spot the systems being used to send large-scale spam and block it quickly, to spot the command and control infrastructure being used by long-term APTs, tear it down, disrupt it. In the UK, that's probably been the single most successful initiative from our National Cybersecurity Centre, but only applied to government. The next challenge is to extend that umbrella of protection to industry. Then for me, there's a couple of last pieces. Zero trust. A different security model which starts from the premise that you are untrusted until you authenticate yourself. You may be accessing from an untrusted channel, an untrusted machine. So rather than assuming a start level of trust, we start here and build up from there. Google are doing that. It's revolutionary for them. It allows them to provide a very fine-grained control of the level of access that their staff have, depending on the environment they access from, their geographic location, their patterns of work as well. That also brings us to holistic security. So not treating cybersecurity in isolation, but linking it to insider threat monitoring and fraud control as well. Moving us from low-level security events, endpoint, network, and perimeter, to really understanding the context about who this person is, what they're working on, how they normally interact, building a very rich idea of what normal actually is. That's a challenge, because it means connecting things like the Security Operations Center properly to the business. That's a challenge. I've seen it done well in oil and gas. I could mention a couple of the super majors. I've also seen it done really badly at arm's length with an outsourced SOC that knows nothing about the business they support as well. And you'll recognize that. And then for me, there's a reminder. We're not the only ones who are innovating. This is a $600 billion business. And my one takeaway about organized crime is they are agile and adaptable and driven to innovate. And their risk calculus is very different from ours sometimes. If they succeed, they do remarkably well. The price of failure can actually be quite significant as well sometimes. So ladies and gentlemen, that's a view maybe of the future, some of the challenges and responses. And the strange thing is, after 30 years, I am still an optimist, actually. Because I do look at the community, And I do see us making inroads, making a difference. And I do see us sometimes winning some of those fights. So thank you very much.